Greetings and welcome to episode 179 of Bible 180 with 180 episodes between Genesis and Revelation. We're on Revelation Part 3, looking at the seven churches of Revelation in Revelation chapters 2 and 3. Church number 4 is Thyatira. Thyatira was a river town about 35 miles beyond Pergamum. And what's fascinating about Thyatira is that it's so unfascinating. It's really kind of boring. In Thyatira, there's no worthy landmarks, no famous temples, no huge libraries like Pergamum, no large theaters like Ephesus. It's kind of like a run-of-the-mill, boring town between the fortified cities of Sardis and Pergamum, who had walls surrounding them and armies to serve their fortified cities. And being a river town, Thyatira was not defensible. In a sense, Thyatira was an early warning system between Sardis and Pergamum, because if approaching armies could conquer Thyatira and then use it as an outpost, they could take over Sardis and Pergamum. And so under those circumstances, the citizens of Thyatira, if they were overtaken by foreign armies, it was just they served as kind of a conquering ground for the other cities. Thyatira was the least distinguishable and least famous and the smallest of the seven churches, partially because it had been overtaken by so many different armies. And whenever it was overtaken by an army, it would fly the flag of whatever army had overtaken them. An early church writer called Thyatira an unimportant community, a city with no first-rate dignity, the least known, least important, least remarkable of the seven churches of Revelation. And yet, the words of Jesus from the Revelation to the churches of Thyatira is the longest of the seven churches. We know least about the church, but the revelation of Jesus says the most to this city. Why is that? Well, each church can be characterized by some description that still fits today, not only churches, but people. Thyatira is known as the compromising church, the church where convictions and beliefs and commitments were compromised. See, Thyatira had learned the fine art of compromise. Since they were overtaken by so many invading armies in any other city, it was small and indefensible. Since they really didn't ever quite know who was going to be long-term in charge of their city, they learned the fine art of compromise. Now, politically speaking, compromise is how you get things done. The ever-crowded field for presidential candidates and debates and requests funding special interest groups make compromise a political necessity. Bills are passed in the House and Senate, often with compromise provisions, because you never know that you're not going to get what you fully want. You have to compromise to get things done. Compromise may be good for political expediency, because without compromise politically, you don't get anything done. You need compromise in the world of politics, but in the world of faith, in the world of a relationship with Jesus that's real and personal, ain't no room for compromise. You don't get a church or denomination or Christian to do collective bargaining with God. Let's see if we can talk God into this one. That's what the church of Thyatira was doing. Give it a little here, just change a little there, do what it takes to get by. And if you have to sacrifice some of your values, your integrity, your morals, your blood, that's okay, because compromise in the church of Thyatira, that's what they did to get by. And so the first words to the church of Thyatira are these. These are the words of the Son of God, whose eyes are like a blazing fire and whose feet are like burnished bronze. Eyes like a blazing fire. Jesus is clear to them that the Son of God ain't nothing hidden from the eyes of his view. Jesus, the Son of God, is able to penetrate the secret recesses of their compromising hearts. If they thought that they could just hide a little bit of their compromising sins from God, they couldn't. The blazing fire in his eyes. There's nothing that God doesn't know about with us. There's no innermost thoughts and desires that we can hide from God. Christians are to be lights to this world, even if we have dark hearts and dark thoughts and a compromising spirit. We're not going to be a light to the world. To be a light to the world means to be uncompromising in our values, beliefs, and commitments. The problem is that oftentimes we think that just a little bit of sin it ain't going to matter too much. It doesn't matter. But there's no sin that escapes the blazing eyes of Jesus. You can't hide under a bushel basket from God. Bronze, feet of bronze, is a symbol that is used in the Bible for judgment. So God's judgment of sin is both accurate and righteous. God is a righteous judge who hates sin and calls us to stand up for our faith. So, in a little bit further in the church, the words to the church, the condemnation continues with a reference to Jezebel, a prophetess who was trying to get the congregation of Thyatira. Don't worry about entering into sexual immorality and offering food offered to idols. Jezebel's wanted to kind of dethrone the teachings of Jesus and say, just do what you want. It's all going to be okay. But the word to Thyatira, don't be compromising in your faith. Don't give in to short-term compromises that will have long-term consequences. Remain faithful is what the Spirit of Jesus encourages the church at Thyatira and those us till today to not compromise. The next church, the fifth church, is Sardis. Sardis is located in a range of mountains, and what's important about the location of Sardis is that it was built right next to the Pactolius River that ran down the mountain and joined another river in the valley. The Pactolius River provided them with a constant stream of fresh water, and unlike the church of Thyatira, Sardis had walls and protections that would protect them from invaders. In fact, Sardis was one of the greatest fortress cities in the ancient world, very different from Thyatira, that was invaded by armies on a regular basis, where they had the thought that they had to compromise in order to survive. Why did the city of Sardis figure they had to defend their city so much? Well, the Pactolius River brought not only fresh water to Sardis, but Sardis was also the wealthiest city of the seven. Sardis was the first place in Asia where coins were minted in 560 BC. And remember King Midas, who was a mythic character where everything he touched turned to gold? King Midas got hungry because his food kept turning to gold. He touched it and it turned to gold. He lost his family and friends because he touched them and they were turned to gold. And so in frustration, King Midas went to the gods and asked them for release from his sad fate, and he was told to go bathe in the Pactolius River. And so ever since then, the fable goes the Pactolius River rolled over golden sands. So Sardis not only received fresh water from the waters of the Pactolius River, but also gold dust. The ancient Greeks tried many times to capture Sardis, but each time they failed. So with the gold dust, with the wealth of the city, with all the trade and commerce that went on, Sardis was a place of wealth and luxury. And the wealth and luxury, it's kind of like as if it were Las Vegas, Reno, Miami, Atlantic City, all combined into one. Sardis was notorious for loose living, for pleasure seeking, and for general decadence on a grand degree. Sin City at its finest, or Sin City at its worst. So to the letters of the churches in Revelation, the letter to Sardis is the most scathing and harshest. Ephesus was faithful and efficient, but not warm and loving. Smyrna was beautiful and a spiritual wonder, but poor and persecuted. Pergamum was trying to have it both ways. Thyatira was full of promise if it didn't go off course, but the church of Sardis doesn't even deserve to be called a church. To the church of Sardis, these words are spoken. I know your works. You have a name of being alive, but you are dead. Wake up, strengthen what remains and is at the point of death. If you do not wake up, I will come like a thief, and you will not know what hour I will come to you. I have not found any work of yours completed in the eyes of God. So Sardis looks alive on the outside, but is in fact dead. The church at Sardis had lost their purpose and reason for being a church. With all of their easy living, they considered themselves safe when they actually were asleep. Instead of being the compromising church of Thyatira, they were the complacent church. The complacent church, spiritually dead, lost in their own sin, and missing out. The promise to the church of Sardis comes when the angel says to the church, if you conquer, you will be clothed like white robes, and I will not blot out their name in the book of life. I will confess your name before the Father and all the angels. In ancient times, white robes stood for victory. When they conquer their complacency, they will be robed in white robes of victory. When they conquer their complacency, they will receive a name in heaven. If you can imagine standing before the judgment seat of Christ with all kinds of people, and you will receive that white robe, it means you have to get out of your complacency. Can't compromise like Thyatira. You can't just be complacent. You got to get off your butt and be a good follower faithfully of Jesus. Philadelphia is city number 6. Philadelphia means a city of brotherly love. From the Greek, remember we talked about that in when we were talking about the Gospel of John. And long before the city was named that in Pennsylvania, there was a Philadelphia in Asia Minor. Now this in the country of Turkey. The father of Tertullian of Carthage said about this city, they demonstrated something I don't have. The thing that converted me to Christianity was that they loved one another. The first city, Philadelphia, had a church that lived up to its name. See, Philadelphia was the newest one of the 7 churches, and of course it was had no long history since it was a new church. It was 28 miles southeast of Sardis, sat up on a small hill on a volcanic plain. The land was very fertile for growing, very lush, had many vineyards. In fact, the wine from Philadelphia was some of the greatest wine available at that time. And since it was on a volcanic plain, they didn't have mountains to protect them, nor did they have huge stone blocks to build a fortress around the city. Instead, it was on a continental fault line that was prone to earthquakes that would regularly come, and earthquakes became common and the aftershocks in the city of Philadelphia. So in preparation, what they needed to do is prepare themselves for this day of trial, is what they called it, building their buildings with pillars for support. That's what the city of Philadelphia was known for, the pillar that would hold up the building so that if shook, it wouldn't fall down. It was at Philadelphia that it became a pillar, accustomed to name a pillar in honor of some citizen who had been giving good service to the church. When someone is called a pillar of the church, it comes from Philadelphia, where they would name the pillars that would hold up the ceilings. So that's why at the end of the letter to the church at Philadelphia, it says, he who conquers, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God. A pillar in a temple that will be named for them in the day of trial when things get shaky. And that what's interesting about the church at Philadelphia is that it just receives praise. Among the 7 churches, Philadelphia receives praise and appreciation. It's the smallest church, the least power, the least influence, but the revelation of the Spirit of Jesus to this church was great. He knew their deeds and their faithfulness to keep the Word of God and the claims of Christ alive. Because they, in the words of the Spirit to Philadelphia church, they kept my word and have not denied my name. They were effective witnesses to who Jesus was. 7th church of Revelation is the church of Laodicea. Again, geographically, Laodicea is an interesting town because it was also built on a large plateau, and it was kind of a fortified city, but it lacked no water. They could have built a city closer to the river, but that would have made it indefensible, and so they built the city 2 miles south of the river on a strong defensible location. But the city's water supply had to be brought in, listen to this, from hot springs 6 miles away by way of a stone aqueduct. So figure that. The water that came to Laodicea came through an aqueduct from a hot spring, and it was hot and salty when it went into the aqueduct, and when an enemy wanted to attack the city, it would just destroy the aqueduct. We'll return to that in a moment. Laodicea was rich and prosperous and full of pride on a major trade route, and Laodicea also raised a special breed of dark wool sheep that made glossy, dark purple garments, which were the softest and most elegant of the kind in its Roman Empire. Financially and economically, Laodicea was doing very well. It had to do with wealth and beautiful garments. Life was good. Life was good at Laodicea. But the faith wasn't good at the church of Laodicea. Listen to this. Jesus has his harshest words for the church of Laodicea. He says, I know your works. I wish that you were either hot or cold. So, because you are lukewarm, like the water that comes in the aqueduct, starting hot and then kind of gets lukewarm, since you're neither hot nor cold, I will spit you out of my mouth. For you say, I am rich, I have prospered, I need nothing. You don't realize that you are wretched, pitiful, poor, blind, and naked, because you're like your lukewarm water, because you're poor despite having a banking center, because you blind even though you make ointments for ears and eyes, because you're naked even though you make fine purple garments from your dark colored sheep, and because you're lukewarm, I'm gonna spit you out of my mouth. The word that's used there is vomitar, which doesn't mean spit out. It means vomit you out of my mouth. Because you are lukewarm. I know Thumper used to say that if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. My mom also said that to me many times. But Jesus isn't being very nice here. And the reason of that is because of the lukewarm indifference of the church of Laodicea. The lukewarmness makes the Spirit of Jesus want to vomit. And perhaps the reason for that is because the opposite of faith is not unbelief. The opposite of faith is not doubt. The opposite of faith is indifference. It's not giving a hoot. It's indifference. The opposite of faith is not just caring one way or the other, it's being lukewarm. You see, Jesus during his earthly ministry didn't have any trouble getting through to his friends and disciples. They believed in him, and even those who were his enemies showed admiration and love for Jesus. Many of Jesus' enemies turned into passionate followers, but in each case there was something to start from, a chance to determine the future of those people. But what do you do with someone who's indifferent? What do you do with an uninspired, uninspirable, insipid, lukewarm people who don't care one way or the other? Spirit of Jesus says that I'm about to vomit you out of my mouth. You make me gag. But Jesus says, even though you're spiritual, even though you're wealthy, you're spiritual poor because you don't have that relationship with me. So then Jesus says, listen, I'm standing at the door knocking. Hear my voice and open a door and I will come to you. We'll talk about that in the next episode. And so these 7 churches are not just 7 churches from a bygone day. They're traits that churches today and people in churches today hold to. To the churches Ephesus, the first church, which was a church that had lost its first love. It was doctrinally pure but rejected and resisted false teachers. They lost their love for others. Jesus knocks and said, hear my voice and let me in. The church of Smyrna, persecuted and poor church. They started to wonder where God was. Jesus knocks and says, let me in. Church at Pergamum, powerful church who stood fast in the face of extreme pressure but was compromising. Jesus says, let me in. Church of Thyatira, complacent, giving in. Jesus says, let me in. Church of Sardis, a growing church, waking up from their slumber. Jesus says, let me in. Church of Philadelphia, the land of opportunity, but was going south. Jesus says, let me in. Church of Laodicea, a church that made Jesus so sick he wanted to vomit them out in their lukewarm indifference. Jesus says, let me in. Words that still speak to us today from these 7 churches of Revelation that characterize not only churches, but people. All of those traits, all of them, are ones we see in churches and one we see in individuals. And to all of them, Jesus says, I stand at the door knocking. Let me in. Let him in. Let him in. Be grateful. And I look forward to being with you in the next and last episode. Until then, you take good care. Bye-bye.